breathing things into existence in that way. But then also, it looks like we're recording, so maybe we want to just kind of kick this off. But yeah, I've definitely got some thoughts.
Well, why don't you start out, Richard, and oh yeah, and talk about your perspective on it.
Okay, I most definitely will. But before I do, Dr. Breck, I got to say, I love the hat. I love the hat.
This is my field forged cap for Confederate cavalry.
He's in the field and he's forging. The cavalry has arrived.
You just need your corncob pipe and you'll be set. You'll be a true Missourian.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. That works too.
You kind of look like did you ever watch The Rebel, Johnny Yuma?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the feeling I'm getting out of this one. All right, so we were the goal of the day is to be talking about magic, specifically in the context of creative writing and fiction writing. So I get a lot of heat from this for a lot of people. I hang out with magicians, and I don't mean like on the stage magicians, but like actual people who practice magic. My friend Wolf Ingesenu, who is an English magician and is also a practicing Odinist over in England. I've done a few joint pieces with him, and I have another joint piece with him that's going to be coming out pretty soon. The idea of magic, you're like, what is this, Richard? This is kind of weird. And when you read about it, magic is the old-time equivalent to me of performance psychology. Or you could say sports psychology, but performance psychology in any skill. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sports skill. And I would say that it's kind of like, if you think about what history is to political science or what philosophy is to sociology, that's what magic is to performance psychology. So it's nothing weird. It's nothing. Well, I mean, you can make it weird and you can make it wacky if you want to, but you can do that with just about anything. But it is a skill. It's a technique coming from the Greek word techne, and it's really built around two things, which is pretty simple. It's built around the idea of linking something together, connecting something together, or it's built on the idea of separating something, of severing something. So either building ties or severing them. And so essentially when you understand that, you come to understand, okay, well, that's all it is. This is pretty interesting thing. Well, what can you do with it? You can do a lot with it in the combat sports, which is something that I've been working on in the last couple of weeks. You can do this with creative writing and fiction as well. You can do it with the mind. You can do it with the body. You can do it with the imagination. You can do it with the physical. It's what you want to do with it. I think a lot of people, they get freaked out about magic. It's kind of like the gun debate. The gun doesn't get up and shoot people. People shoot people. What are you going to use the gun for? That's kind of how I look at magic. So there's a lot of Christians out there that think it's bad or dangerous. They kind of take the magic gun control route, but I think it's a tool just like anything else.
The question I have, that's all very fascinating, and admittedly it's terrain with which I'm woefully ignorant, but I've nevertheless studied sort of other magic within other cultural contexts. And the question I have for you, Richard, and Dr. Breck, Leanna, is the defining magic within the context of an individualized culture. Do you see variations of that, or are you arguing that this is more of a natural science? This is something that perhaps overlays the existence with which we reside, and it's not specific to one cultural model, so to speak.
I would argue that the second option, it's a natural process, and so, but different cultures are going to do different things with it, and it's going to have different characteristics based on how they're going to be using it. For example, if you go and you look at in the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church had two categories. They had the category of natural magic, based on the ideas of Aristotle and, the concept of nature, which is found in Aristotle. And then they also had demonic magic, or goetia. A lot of people don't realize that today. So when a lot of people, the only time really, I think, especially in our circles, magic gets discussed is when, it's like, oh no, the devil worshippers, they're out there and they're sacrificing babies and all this different stuff. And it's magic. It's bad. It's bad, bad, bad. And it's like, okay, well, this is one expression of it. I think that if you go back and you look at, I'm really into the, like Aristotle and the four causes,
How about Lucretius and his on nature, being a pupil of Aristotle? Is that sort of in the realm as well?
It could be. I have not read that one, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I haven't. And it sounds like it's one I need to read. And it's interesting because you would be interested in that, because you are a very like natural world guy from the podcast I've seen of you, like out in nature. And I think that it's interesting that nature gets defined as being like, the woods and the animals in today's world, right? But when you do look at Aristotle and possibly his pupil, I don't know, I haven't read his pupil that you mentioned, but it sounds like you have, they're defining nature much more broadly. It can come from the idea of essence, which means the word eidos.
I was just thinking of vitality, right? Which was very much a concept that was tethered with herbology and the natural sciences, the vitality of things. There's a current, there's a sort of energy that's within, and even, indigenous tribes afforded that same concept to the whole of the natural world, even the rocks and the stones, and they'd pass the talking stick, right? These objects were very much endowed with a sort of force, be it, the Cherokee might call it that force, and I'm going to butcher this, but tohi, right? And then you've got across the ocean, you've got the Tao, which permeates the whole of everything, and to act in accordance with that, you would be sort of in a more sound and what is it? You'd be in balance with things.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. You talk about the idea of the talking stick. That's a perfect example of magic and the idea of linkage. I'll never forget when I was in college. I was at University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia. It was the fall semester of 2015. And I was learning about something that I often talk about in my writings a lot, the philosophy of postmodernism. I'll never forget it. And the professor it was very interesting. The professor goes in there. There was this girl, and her name was Rachel. Her and I would often walk to the class. We were leaving the same building and would go across the campus to the English literary criticism class we were going to. And she was kind of a strange girl, very really into the books and not really a social person, and very asocial, and just kind of a frozen, frigid kind of person, and she's sitting in class, and we're sitting in class one day, and the professor says, hey, I'm going to show you the power of representation and association. And she gets up on the whiteboard, she takes her little marker out, draws a rabbit. She says, okay, you see this rabbit, it's a bunny. She's like, now I'm going to show you how I can link association to anything. And, she goes and is looking at everybody in the class. She's like, you, Rachel. She's like, I'm going to call you Bunny. Your name is now Bunny. Every time we talk about bunnies, and it was interesting because this was a very cunning, manipulative professor. And she selected the person who kind of had a weaker personality that was afraid of social confrontation. Use her as a sacrificial lamb, so to speak, to illustrate her point. And it was very interesting because Rachel was getting very uncomfortable. She's like, I don't want to be Bunny. I don't want to do this. She's getting very uncomfortable. And the teacher was messing with her. And then at the end of the class, she says, okay, we're not going to continue this charade. We won't call you Bunny, but I've done this to illustrate what we can do. So this is the power of magic, the idea of linking. So you're linking things that may be disparate together, so in the case of this, it was Bunny is linked to Rachel. In the case of the talking stick, the idea of this stick here is getting the power of talking. Nobody talks until they
Yeah.
hold dick. And so
You
over
hit
time,
it. Yeah.
yeah, that association builds up. And there's like a stimulus response thing, you know, kind of like a Pavlov's dog situation, you know, where he's ringing the bell when the dogs eat the food, and then the dogs salivate. Well, even when there's no food, the dogs hear that bell, you know, the dogs still salivate anyway. So
Yeah.
that's the idea of magic. And a lot of people will say magic's only about linking. That's not true. It's also about separation. Because the
Yeah.
reality is, for there to be a yes, there's got to be a no. You know, for
I'm
there to be a
thinking,
no, there's gotta be an
as you
no.
say this, I'm even thinking this on the chemical level, or the, you know, the physical level, as it pertains to alchemy, perhaps the
Yes.
the separation of atoms, the joining of atoms. That's the, I guess that would be the theory there. But I wonder if alchemy is just a prototypical version of what we now know as chemistry, perhaps. And this is me with my very rudimentary sort of linkage of ideas. But that's just something I thought about when you were talking about the separation and the conjoining.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that?
100%. I think so. And I would say that if you, from my understanding of alchemy, is that you're going from getting rid of an old form to assuming a new form. And, you know, we come to the word eidos and morphe, which means
Yeah.
form in Greek. And the form is really, to me, this is what pertains to your question about cultures. This is going to have a different expression, different cultures.
Ah,
Cultures essentially have different forms. So a European form will be different than an African form, will be different than a Middle East form, will be different than a Chinese form. And so they're going to be linking these techniques. Techne is really the efficient cause and causality to different forms. So if we use the famous example, right? The idea of Marine Corps training, you know, the boot camp, you know, you're shedding the old identity
yeah,
of the
without a
civilian,
doubt, being built
becoming
up.
one with the Marine, right? And so
Yep.
Joseph Evola talks about this in his book, Revolting Against the Modern World. He talks about it in chapter 1. And it's something I've talked about on the podcast as well as in articles. He talks about the idea of Rex Nemoris, king of the woods, that the man has to escape his slave nature. And then he has to kill the king of the woods with a branch from the sacred oak tree to win the hand of the Princess Diana, and then he himself becoming king of the woods. So there's this idea of
There's a succession plan there, and
there
it's
is.
rooted in the cosmology of the people, right?
There is.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I would argue that, as I understand it, you know, and in my experience, you know, you have to already fix your mind on the form you want to become, and it's got to be you before you become it. That seems to be how it works. You know, you can't be like, hey, you know, oh man, I guess I'll be great when I achieve this. It's like, no, I am that. I'm going to achieve it. No problem. I'm already that. Okay. That
Well,
gives you the
it's
fuel
sculpting.
to go do it.
It's also why I'm so harsh on myself. You know, when I did this fast, 3-week fast and whatnot, I'm shaping this body. You know, I'm sculpting this body is what it is. You know, and I continue to view it as that this is sort of the easel by which I'm actively undergoing a transformation, and not just wallowing in it's the fault of the agriculture today, the stuff they put in the food. It's like, yeah, you could blame everybody but yourself, and where does that get you? So
Right. Well, and it
it's
really
sort of pragmatic.
takes away your agency, you know, and it's like, and unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people, you know, in these communities that are kind of more dissident, and they really fall into that trap. And so much of the media that's aimed at them is, oh no, it's so bad. There's so many bad things. It's like, okay, yes, I go back to, you know, what did Mad Dog Mattis say? You know, the enemy gets a vote, but it's like, okay, that's true, but I get a vote too. So, you know, what am I going to do with my vote? And, you know, that's
on the individual level. Yeah.
Exactly. So, you know, I think about that a lot, and that really pertains to a lot of things. It's funny, That's why I think the body is a really great thing to be working with. I've if you've read any of my stuff and talked about it in the past, I've been a personal trainer for a long time and done a lot of things, and you can literally be looking at, you can feel with your hands the form of somebody changing, the matter changing form. And so
isn't that exciting too, to see it, to witness it? Yeah, I get so much joy seeing people win. I'm not a green with envy person. I see somebody who's winning and succeeding, and man, I get motivated. I love to see that. Don't you? It's awesome.
Dude, and you said you're 100% right in it. You get motivated because you see that if one person can achieve this, that means another person can achieve it. You're like, okay, and it's like gauntlet thrown down, challenge accepted. Okay, it's like, you know what? All right, they could do that. There's no reason I couldn't do that. Come on,
right?
It's like,
where do you see this sort of thing in, as it pertains to writing, getting the thing done? Dr. Breck and I were talking about this, and I was just telling him, like, I get in these moments of where I'm just putting words down on the page and I'm in the zone, and then that final stretch, I just kind of, I start thinking about that next project, and so I've got a graveyard of unfinished projects. And so, how would you implement some of the concepts that you've described here into writing to get the thing actualized?
Well, for me, I would say my biggest challenge in fiction writing is it's the inner critic. And the reason that is because I feel like fiction writing is uniquely special because it's a part of your soul. And if you go back and you read Aristotle, he says the soul, psyche, is the essence, eidos, of a person, which is the same thing as its form, morphe. He talks about this in the book Metaphysics. The exact citation escapes me at this moment, but he talks about that. And so I always found it's been easier to write history or kind of, real events out in the real world, because I can kind of like psychologically hide behind that shield of, but it's real. It really happened. So I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an idea between, James LaFond and I did a podcast way back in 2021. It was on World War I, and it was like a 2-part one because the video got disconnected. And so in the second part, we talked about romanticism and we talked about the distinction between subject and object. And I feel like writing something like history or current events or whatever it is, it's in the objective world of objects around me. So I can just say, I'm not crazy. But fiction writing is subjective in the sense that it's coming from you, the subject, from you. So that's a hard one for me. And so I think that when the inner critic starts going, it's kind of an attack on you as well. I think what's oftentimes happened, at least has been my experience, is that like I get to the halfway point in a creative writing project.
Yeah.
Everything's coherent. And then at the halfway point, it's like, So for a long time, like I studied story structure, and I've done a few articles on like character archetypes and things like that. I have an unpublished one on story structure itself. And when you study it objectively, you're looking at other people's stories, you find there is a structure. And right at the halfway point, like you can kind of end the story if you wanted to, but the halfway point sets up the big climax, whatever the big battle or goal or point you're trying to make is.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think it's hard because you're like, well,
how do you wrap it up, right?
Yes,
or you might know the ending, but the in between, sort of the getting there, the journey part might not be as clear. So there's that phenomena at play as well. It
is a hard one because I know and for me, it's like, it's easier to start when you're on the journey and see where it goes. But yeah, when you have the goal in mind in the end, it makes sense. And, we used to do, I think about this. So I was in an online private academy all through my high school years. We had a very intensive writing program, fiction and nonfiction. And
what was that program? I'd like to know. I homeschool my kids, and you mentioned it before, and I wrote it down, and just it escaped me.
Yeah, so it's called the Potter School. The
Okay.
Potter School, and it's still around. My brother was doing it up till about 4 years ago. Up
Is
till
it still good? Still
Oh yeah,
quality?
yeah. I mean, from when
Nice.
my brother was doing it, in the spring semester of 2020, I mean, it was still rocking.
Yeah.
A lot of the same teachers still from my day, and they did a really good job, and it taught me how to write. And as I look back, I think about it. We would writing, and I feel like physical fitness and combat sports are kind of similar. In
James
this
says the same.
in the
Yeah.
sense of, and I'm kind of putting these pieces together as I'm talking. So I like to describe it. I have a big box of puzzle pieces that
Yeah.
I've collected over the years. And I'm at this stage in my life right now where I'm trying to put them together. And it's always helpful because sometimes you get the second set of eyes on things, second, third set of eyes. And it's like,
No,
hey,
I love it. I
puzzle
love
pieces?
what you're putting down.
So
Yeah.
think about this, right? So I talked about this in the last podcast on rope flow. People that do like powerlifting training, they have their big 3 lifts. They've got their bench, their squat, their deadlift. Everything's built around that. And then you have lots of like accessory exercises that support that. So
Yep.
for the squat, it could be like calf raises, Hindu squats, with a nod to our good friend Matt Fury. Different things. For bench press, it could be push-ups, it could be dips. For deadlifts, it could be kettlebell swings, these different kind of things.
Yeah.
And with writing, I feel like it's the same, as well as with combat sports as well. With your combat sports, it's like, okay, you got your striking, you got your your lead, your cross, your hooks, your uppercut. Okay, well, how do we develop that? Okay, rope flow, different kind of rotational exercises, different kind of things that become accessories. So
Yeah.
with creative writing, it seems to be the same thing. And when I was at the Potter School, what they were really good about was using these kind of accessory exercises in creative writing to build your ability. And then your book, your novel, your short story, your whatever, these are the big lifts that you tie in, that everything ties in together, right? So we would do a lot of stuff, descriptive paragraphs. Descriptive paragraphs were big. So I like to do descriptive paragraphs of people, and I like to do descriptive paragraphs of places. And so what I would do is that I would get a picture, and you would include the picture of the person. And you would say, okay, we're describing this
Yeah.
with 7 to 8 sentences. You get a
Yeah.
picture of the place. And I'm a very image-driven person. I'm a
Yeah.
visual person. I think that's why I like to talk about form, because the word image comes from the word eidos, which means form in Greek. So maybe that's why it all goes together. But so for me, that's very like, and the reason I like Pulp Fiction is because the images that are painted with the words are very vivid, which is a skill that's really lost, because the main medium of entertainment is no longer either A, paintings, and B, the written word. It's movies. When I wrote my first book on World War I, and I was deciding how I was going to do it, we went to an antique store, and I bought a 1957 comic book of the superhero Black Hawk. And he wasn't really a superhero. He was like a World War II mercenary pilot for hire from Poland. And he had like 6 different guys that were on his team. And he was pretty cool. He had the uniform and everything. And I was reading that. I was sitting on the toilet. I won't forget. I was reading it. And this thing's like antique. And I had a lot of friends that be like, why do you go to these stores and actually read them? Why don't you keep them in mint condition? I'm like, because they were made to be read. That's what.
Because they're like antique guns. You're not just gonna have a Sharps pepper box just sitting there. You want to shoot the darn thing, even if it blows up in your hand, right?
Exactly. That's why they made it. So I'm reading this thing, and I thought, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
The difference between a comic book and literature is that the descriptive paragraphs are pictures. They're literally hand-drawn pictures.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so what's left
I love that.
in the comic book is either dialogue or narration, because
Yeah.
the artist is literally drawing the picture. So you don't have
Even narration is sparse because it's more of a visual medium than anything, and dialogue heavy also.
That's true.
Yeah.
And especially as the years have gone on, you compare stuff that was being done in the 50s and 60s to comic books that are being done today. And oh yeah, there's like no narration. Now in the older ones, they maintain narration. You know, you read anything like a Stan Lee, you know, comic book. And I mean, he's the most famous example, but I mean, he's like doing like very pithy narration, you know, and but now you're just not seeing that. You're seeing a lot of like more like experimental angles, you know, which is also what you see in movies too, right? You know, in the 50s and 60s, they're shooting things like square on or like 3/4 view or like a wide shot. You know, we kind of discussed with our Dracula podcast. Whereas now it's like,
or it's like Battlefield Earth, that John Travolta flick that failed.
I love that movie. Oh my
I
God.
do too. No, I do too. I do too. It's real cornball. It's real campy, but man, it's and like every scene is just the most unorthodox.
Oh
you
yeah.
know,
Well,
like angling.
they do a good job because I mean it sells the
It's a
message they're
convention,
trying to
right?
sell. It is a convention, exactly.
Yeah.
So the real magic I feel like and actually this was something I was telling Dr. Breck I want to talk to you about. The real magic that I feel like is when if you're an artist, and this goes back to this idea of linking in magic, if you can kind of link genres together, you're really playing ball. And that's why I love Pulp Fiction, because Pulp Fiction for me is a genre that links a lot of genres together that are divorced in the modern world. So we're back to this idea of magic. We're linking and separating. And so
what I love that in Pulp Fiction, the author will oftentimes is not a professed expert in, say, you know, the Aztecs, but he's going to go about it, and you know, it's okay if you don't have it all down. You know, it's same with historical fiction, where it's, you know, you do your darndest, but there was still in that vintage literature tradition, there was still some creative license to be afforded to that, and at the end of the day, it was fun, right?
100%. And I think, you know, people back then, you know, you guys had a podcast called Specialization is for Insects.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the 19th century, in the 1920s, the 1930s, you know, there wasn't this idea of specialization had not taken root yet in the broader culture. Yeah, sure. Okay. It had taken root in the factories and in the satanic mill.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in the broader culture,
That's a good point.
It had not. And so you have these guys who are generalists. And so they can kind of do a little bit of everything. And literature, they know enough to get by. And they can roll with it and then start doing the story and the drama and the emotions and using that as a backdrop. I mean, now that's really hard for people to do.
Yeah, well, the dime novels too, you had to get them out, you know, you got them out quickly. And like, I think of L. Frank Baum, the writer of the Oz books, which I just adore. I have a soft spot for, even as a 39-year-old man, you know. It's funny that would be my, you know, my thing. But he wrote a lot of stuff beyond Oz, you know, like you know, like detective stories in Panama, and like just he would have these sort of he'd afford quite a bit of creative license, and they were just fun, you know. It's stuff that is oft forgotten or neglected within his bibliography. But there were tons of authors like that, right? Like you know, I've read some stuff where it's just like, oh, probably got this whole like this whole scientific discipline wrong, but hey, it carries a story anyways, nevertheless.
Well, and then there's the idea, you know, are the muses speaking to you, and you're kind of drawing stuff out of the ether, and you can kind of get stuff right by being in the zone, kind of subconsciously rather than consciously. You know, intellectual intuition is the old phrase you often read in like Thomas Aquinas, and Julius Evola talks about this pretty extensively as well, you know. And you know, a lot of times they do, you know, I oftentimes part of people say, well, Richard, you know, why do you have Pulp Fiction Renaissance? And you know, I oftentimes tell people that know me for my more like serious historical or like geopolitical type work, I say, look, you're going to learn more about foreign policy, I feel like, from a Chuck Norris movie than you are going to be from Foreign Affairs magazine. I spent years reading Foreign Affairs magazine, and I've spent years watching Chuck Norris, and Chuck Norris gets the predictions right a little bit more, than often not. You're
not kidding. They've got to pull, these writers had a pulse on things, and even just in their ability to like Robert A. Heinlein's For Us the Living, his first, it was unfinished for a good long while, but it was written in the 1930s, and the man predicted YouTube, like streaming services all the way back when. He wrote about this, where there'd be an economy as such where you have a UBI, and that hasn't been realized, but there's certainly been talks around it in recent times. And then there would be folks that there'd be a gal that would dance in front of a camera before viewers and get her shekels that way, and I'm reading this back in like 2006 when it just came out, how many years later, like posthumously, and I'm just blown away at this, science fiction becomes science fact. I mean, he predicted so much. We could just talk Heinlein forever in this respect, but I digress.
Well, and then there's the question, which Dr. Breck and I have talked about this a little bit, and I've kind of been researching recently, this idea where, are you predicting it, or kind of are you creating it in like a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Almost like a predictive programming, correct?
You could say
on a more macro level, anyway.
Yeah, you could say a predictive programming. And it was funny, I was talking about this with somebody the other day. In a sense, yeah. Or in a sense, you also thinking, if we go back to the idea of performance psychology, magic being performance psychology, one of the main things in performance or sports psychology is visualization. It's like, I'm visualizing this thing happening. I'm jumping over the hurdle. I'm making the strike, all this different stuff, and so, and visualizing that. So in many ways that I've often called literature or movies to be a form of, I call it strategic level performance psychology, because the way like performance or performance or sports psychology is usually used is what I would say is tactical, right? For a specific physical skill, which is tactical. Big picture, life, meaning your morals, where you fit into things, that's strategic. So the literature that you read, the movies that you watch, the music that you listen to, these things become a form of strategic performance psychology or strategic sports psychology. And so this is why, like, for example, Joseph Stalin tried to kill John Wayne because he understood that John Wayne was conducting strategic level performance psychology for the United States, and it was not in the interest of the Soviet Union. And if you go back and, you look at, we talked about this a little bit on our Dracula podcast, Dr. Breck, you look at Stalin and the Soviet Union and the idea of propaganda, and you're reading the literature of propaganda, they understood this was a form of strategic level performance psychology. That's why in every poster you're seeing a big blonde Russian soldier, punching out a Nazi and all this stuff, riding the tank, shooting the machine gun, all this stuff, and it's like, gets it going.
So let me ask you this. Sorry to cut you off there, Richard. So there's a fellow that I've been watching, Andrew Wilson. I get a kick out of it. I like to kind of listen to his he's a Christian Orthodox and all that, and he debates with folks, with largely folks on the left, but kind of all kind of walks of life. And he's made the case, and it's actually a compelling one that I hadn't considered until recently, and it's the idea that propaganda, it's often in the context of it's a negative thing. But propaganda could be used in a manner with which it's virtuous, and it it can actually be used for good, perhaps. So for instance, you have propaganda out there that encourages the nuclear family and hard work and honesty and all these sort of things, and we saw that. You go back and read some of the vintage literature, and you see these stories of heroism. And I know I've heard you talk on this as well. I think it was a broadcast between you and James where y'all were talking about actually, it was with you, Dr. Breck, and you guys were talking about some of these juvenile adventure novels, and what was the messaging? It was virtuous at its very core. So what do you think of that? Is
100%.
propaganda a good thing? Can
I
be a good thing?
I think so, 100%. I've actually argued the same thing in a 3-part series I did on my old website, which is called mindatwar.org. It's still up. I was pretty active on that from 2018 to 2020. You guys can check it out. I've
Yeah,
thought
we'll do.
redoing the series of articles for Pulp Fiction Renaissance with more things I've learned. And I
Nice.
argued in this series that, yeah, I think it's a good thing. If you go back and you look at, James LaFawn did a series on Joseph L. Bernays, who wrote Crystallizing Public Opinion, and also a book entitled On Propaganda. And it's interesting. I read those probably 10, 11 years ago when I was at University of Mary Washington. And I found that they were very interesting because what he says is, he's like, if you look at the word propaganda, its first usage, I think, is sometime in the 1500s by the Catholic Church, and it's to propagate a doctrine. So
say that again. You broke out. You broke off a little bit. What was that?
Okay. So the definition of the word, the first time propaganda had been used was sometime in the 1500s by the Catholic Church, using it to mean propagating a doctrine.
Yeah.
So
right.
Again, like I said, this is a tool. You can use it for anything. So in today's world, because the term has negative, he also
right.
He also coined the term stereotype, coming from the printing technique, where you had like stereo grooves that would form.
Oh, yeah. So
So
it would kind of be like the save button within a Word doc, where it's like it's a floppy disk, and none of my kids know what that is. I have to explain to them, but it's just a carryover. It's an artifact.
Over time, these words get linked to negativity. And so I think it's kind of disingenuous, though, because it's like, you're doing the same thing, but you're saying, oh, if I put it under this bad name, it's bad. But if I call
do you see that with magic? The word magic? I would venture to guess that you would.
If I call it performance psychology, it's like, oh, okay, cool. If I call it magic, right? Then it's like, Richard's wearing a wizard hat and has a wand. It's like,
that's very interesting, because I'll admit, it does sort of is it illicit? Is that the word? It does sort of invite that response. It certainly does. Because within but I guess it would be wholly dependent on the context and also the lens by which we're, like what lens or what variant of the term magic are we using here? Right. That would be a question that I would suspect some of the listeners might have.
Well, and that's a good point. And I would also argue, if you're 39, I'm 30, we're both old enough to remember when psychology had kind of more of a negative connotation. Whereas in the last 15, 20 years, everything is psychology. I mean, I went to church a couple months ago, and I had not been to church in a couple of years. And, and it was very interesting. I see this use of psychology terminology just exploding in all of the worship songs.
Wow.
In the service by the pastor, which growing up, we never say crap like that.
Yeah.
Anxiety and
you got to wonder, there's a there is the warning, we must be ever cautious not to be spoiled by philosophies, right? By man-made philosophies. So I wonder if tethering some of these philosophies to God's word, what are the implications of that, right?
That's an excellent point. And now we're in the arena of magic, tethering, yoking, linking.
Yeah.
So do we need to take it away? Do we need to sever it? Do we need to cut it? These different kind of things. And, what does the Bible say? He's like, you are a nation set apart, right? You're separated. You're separated.
Yeah, right.
Everybody else, I was reading last night, when, the people of Israel, they say, we want a king. And Samuel is just disgusted. And God said, hey, it's okay. You're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me. Don't worry about it. But, tell them what's going to happen. And he did. And he said, we still want it. We want to be linked and yoked to these ideas that the other people are doing because we think it's cool. We don't want to be separated or set apart anymore. So
Right.
yeah, that can be an issue. So I think so. And so I think propaganda is great, and I think everybody does it. And what I think is interesting is that we have to kind of sometimes change our mentality. I was thinking about this. Well, what if everybody does it? What is the goal of the propaganda in the modern world and society? And this has always been hard for me because I'm a very like black and white person. I'm a very like, pretty simple.
I
I
can be too. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think in many ways, though, it's like, okay, well, no, I have to think in a different way, like the leadership would be thinking, right? And so, like, for example, like I'm fascinated with horror. James, Dr. Breck and you and I have talked about this. I don't understand it. Why do you want to watch the bad guys
Ha.
killing innocent people, particularly attractive women? I don't get that. It's weird. And you kind of have these ideas, and oftentimes these movies will end very nihilistically. What's the point? Well,
Right.
I think in many ways the idea is to herd people into kind of a bourgeoisie suburbanite mentality, because the idea is, hey, we have this really scary stuff that we're bombarding you with, and it herds you back into safety. Because think about this, right? Who is the number one
It is
demographic?
fear is definitely a powerful device, as we learned in 2020 and subsequent events. There's always a catastrophe. That's just kind of what immediately came to mind. So I do wonder if horror lulls one into a constant state of perhaps fear, whether it's, just sort of dabbling, but it nevertheless perhaps makes an effect on somebody on a more shorter long-term basis. And maybe that kind of ties back into the magic that you described, the connecting sort of I don't know, connecting ideas with the person.
That makes sense. I'm glad you said that. If you read the article I wrote recently called The Eagle and the Snake Part 2, Solar, Lunar, and Telluric Secrets of Pulp Fiction, there is kind of a symbiosis there that I would link symbolically between saying things that are scary would be like Telluric, right? That would be horror, and things like suburban and bourgeoisie would be like lunar. So, for example, look at the demographic. What is the demographic that is just absolutely nuts about true crime? Suburban, bourgeoisie, middle-class women, white-collar women.
It's really interesting you bring this up, because just last night I was talking with a buddy of mine, and I go, as a Christian, I do feel a little bit of conviction here. I tend to listen while I'm working. I will on occasion listen to these serial killer documentaries, and I'm very much fascinated with the macabre. And I know you've mentioned the same with the, you're into horror. I'm into Edgar Allan Poe. I'm into cosmic horror, and this sort of thing. But I sort of feel this like filth associated with it. Like I feel a little dirty about it, and I feel a conviction. And he and I were talking more about it, and also having grown up, and I know you have as well, grown up in a world where you're going to see beheading videos. If you're not too careful, you're going to see some pretty gnarly stuff that you probably can't unsee. It's probably embedded somewhere in the subconscious. But then, I've been to third world countries where death is a common occurrence, and there's not the sort of squeamish fear of death. In fact, they're right there looking right at it, dead in the eye,
I think that is a response, a good positive response, and I think about some of my own recent experiences with death, and I wanted to see it, and I said, because I don't want to, but what I wanted to see is that, not being overcome by it. There's a saying sometimes that you'll hear, military and law enforcement people will say, to step over the dead and the dying to accomplish the mission. My issue with horror as a film genre, or serial killers or whatever, is that there's like let me rephrase it. I the reason I like Pulp Fiction is because yes, you have these horrific, scary things, but you have the hero coming in, grabbing the bull by the horns, throwing down, restoring the order at the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah.
And that ritual is the same thing that I firmly believe, from based on my own experience, is that when you're looking death in the eye and you could say, you know what? No, like, I'm not being bothered by this. Okay.
Yeah.
You're kind of reenacting that ritual that you would see in like a Pulp Fiction. Contemporary horror is like just reveling in this idea of death overcoming you and you like dissolving into the death, which to me is a very bad ritual and concerns me. It concerns me very deeply. And so like,
do you mind giving us an example? What sort of works like are you describing? Are you setting apart that are you talking about the ones where there's not sort of a silver lining or a hero at the end of it? Is that what you mean? Where it's just nihilistic and it's just sort of
What about the Saw series?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
That's a good example.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Any of the slashers, any of the Saw series, even sometimes these supernatural things. And also I will add too, and this is like, so we get into this too, you'll often have in those slasher type ones, this idea of like the final girl who can kill the monster. But then of course the monster always comes back.
Oh, right? Yeah. There's sort of at the very end, there's that twist, right?
People always say, oh, well, that's just because they want sequels to make money. Okay. Yeah, whatever. There's always an underlying reason. I can make money off anything. You know?
There's always so many times to bring Jigsaw back, right?
You know, there's a material reason. There's a material reason. There's a spiritual reason too. And I did a podcast years ago with my good friend Daniel Knudsen, who used to make Hallmark movies, now does a lot of commercial projects, but it was a 10-minute podcast on a series that he ran entitled The Void. And I can send that to you and put this on the link.
I'd love to, yeah.
And I talked about horror, and I said, there was a book done by a scholar named Andrew Tudor. And Andrew Tudor was very active in the 70s and 80s. In literary studies and the study of semiotics and structuralism, which I'm really into structuralism and semiotics. I like that. And, he did a study on the horror movies, and he says, from about 1933, when, you start having movies with sound, to 1968, you have this kind of Pulp Fiction type mentality in the horror and the sci-fi. He calls it a closed narrative where, again, the hero throws down, restores the order over the scary.
Yeah.
Post 1968, you're seeing the open-ended narrative, which is this contemporary horror that we see today. And so what I find interesting is two things: is that you have a situation where, if you are having a situation that it represents symbolically at a spiritual level, this goes to Evola and Rosenberg and things of that nature, who are my go-to guys. If you're having a slasher movie where all of the male authority figures are weak or ineffective or are dying off.
Yeah.
You're seeing a situation that's mirroring that in society. And then the girls have to kind of start taking up the mantle as, like, I would call it like girl village self-defense force. Like, the Americans aren't coming to help you. The villagers have got to conduct a resistance by themselves. And obviously this doesn't go so well. And then eventually, if you have one kill the monster at the end, it was like, really high casualty rate to win. But then, the monster comes back and it becomes a never ending cycle. So it's kind of like, it's very symbolic of that, or even in like the Halloween movie series, the character of Dr. Loomis is a guy, he's like passing the torch, where he's like, hey, I'm an old time Anglo-Saxon male authority figure. This is kind of my last rodeo. I'm passing the torch to Jamie Lee Curtis and the teenagers. And so, you see this repeatedly. Whereas, in the old stuff, I'm a huge fan of like the 1950s, the B-grade movie sci-fi ones, where it's always
of course,
an Army officer or an FBI agent or like
the mad scientist.
Exactly. Or a scientist or something.
The astronomer, like out in the middle of the desert.
Exactly. And you even see this with Van Helsing in the story of Dracula. and the many incarnations of Dracula, like the 2004 Hugh Jackman Van Helsing. I love that. He's a cowboy that the Catholic Church contracts.
My favorite is the Klaus Kinski Werner Herzog Nosferatu. That's the Dracula.
Hey, listen, man, that guy freaks me out.
He's a creature, isn't he? He's a bad dude too.
Why, but
Yeah.
he's a bad dude.
He's a bad guy, yeah.
Since I was a child, so like,
Yeah.
I always
Great
loved-
actor, you know,
Oh,
but yeah, but probably not someone I'd like in real life, you know.
No. I've always loved like Halloween, the holiday, as a little kid. It's always been my favorite holiday because I love to dress up, but I never had any interest in dressing up as monsters. I like to dress up as heroic figures. And to me, it was just a natural thing where it's like, hey, for there to be good guys, there to be bad guys, cowboys, Indians, you know, monsters and heroes. And that was why I never really liked, you know, the church's war on Halloween. I was like, you know, maybe I guess that's the Indo-European warrior cast in me. Like, why would you want to shut this down? This is great. We have these monsters to fight, you know? And so, you know, I guess I'm a warmonger of the spiritual astral plane, you know, but it's
you're not letting a catastrophe go to waste. You're gonna go out there guns ablazing.
That's right. I think it's the you know, the Norman blood in me, you know. That's what God made us to do. So, you know, but not everybody's into that, you know, but it's so fascinating. And I think in many ways, spiritually, these horror type figures, whether it's Saw or the slashers or the demons or the space aliens, in today's world, they are the king of the woods. And all of the women that are really interested in this are akin to the Princess Diana. And so I think Pulp Fiction is kind of a ritual where I would love to see, and actually, I think it might have been you. I'm not sure. Because James LaFawn said, he's like, hey, I got a guy. He would like some creative writing advice. What would it be? And I said, here's what I'd love to see. I'd love to see. Like
I'm always down for that.
A John Carter or the Conan the Barbarian fights like a Gen X slasher horror figure.
Yeah, you do it. Oh, that's good. You do a mashup of it's like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type, but it's across like just a broader continuum. So you get some modern with the, you know.
James LaFawn wrote a really good piece. It was a book he did. I think he called it On Writing.
I've got it. Let me bring it out. It's
bring it out. It's got a guy with a typewriter.
Writing Unchained.
Writing Unchained. That's the one. The one. Mine's in the basement next door. And he talked about in that book, he said this idea. He said, you know, if you look at things from different perspectives. He says, from the perspective of the Indians, Jeremiah Johnson is a horror movie. And I was like,
right. Oh, for sure. Oh, yeah, no, really. Oh, I haven't thought of that. It literally is that very thing.
So, and I will give you an example of this. The thing I immediately thought I had watched right before.
Love that movie, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, it's a great one.
Yeah.
I watched right before that. I had watched Fighting Seabees with John Wayne.
Oh, dude, that's my favorite war movie of all time. We're like besties now, as my kids would say. That's the best. Dude, I love that movie. I'm a Navy guy anyways, but yeah, the Fighting Seabees is just hardcore. It's so good.
And you'll know in that movie, there's a scene where some of the Seabees like pick up a Japanese soldier with a crane.
Yeah.
And he's like yelling and screaming, and then the other guys are like,
dude. Well, you know, the Seabees, that's what they are. Their whole insignia, it's a bee. And it's been this way that I've been Port Hueneme. I've been to their base, and it's so cool how they, you know, like a lot of these the Navy rates, they kind of lose some of their spangliness, but the Seabees still have the bee, and in one hand is like what is it, like a shovel, and the other is like some kind of like semi-automatic. It's just gnarly. Yeah. They're great. They've retained their tradition.
Well, and that movie to me is a perfect example of exactly what I'm talking about. You have these guys who are literal blue collar workers, the slave caste, and they go through an alchemical transformation to become warriors. And John Wayne's death makes that possible in that movie. And I've said this before, that's like a biographical film for him, because as I talked about in other pieces, he went into combat as a civilian for 3 months in Papua New Guinea and didn't talk about this. And this is pretty well documented. You can read it in John Wayne, The Life and Legend by Scott Eamon. It's in chapter 7. This is a really bold claim. So people say, that's not true. Why haven't I heard before? I say, go look it up for yourself. So, I like to cite my sources. But it was something that was very special for him. And I think it's a great, when you're putting that out there, like, here's an example. It was April or maybe May of 2022. And my brother and my younger brother, he's 25, I'm 30. That time we were a few years younger, but we've always loved the comic books. Like when we were little, I would always read them to him, and we just nuts about these things, man. And we're in a comic book store, and there are 2 comics. One of them is, I think the title was The Sheriff of Babylon. It was about Iraq, and it was written by an Iraq veteran. Very dark, gritty, morally ambiguous, very modernist, Right. Then suddenly I find a comic book about the Ukraine war. It's brand new. Ukraine war had only been going on for a couple months. And it's the most propagandistic, positive John Wayne. What would you do if a tyrant invaded your nation? Join 5 young people as they stand up to tyranny. And it's like, and I'm like, Harrison, what the heck is this? I'm like, dude, look at the difference, man. And he's like,
don't you recall, what was it? I still clown on this with my buddies. I'll be like, what was it? The Ghost of Kiev. Do you remember that whole psyop? And so like every once in a while, whenever there's like a noticing or there's like the new thing, I'll just send a text. I'll be like, my man's Ghost of Kiev, he be wildin', yo, because it was like all over it was like that kind of stuff. It was, and everyone was falling for it. And there'd be like these like hot Ukrainian chicks that blew up tanks, and people are falling for it. Dumb Americans are like falling for this propaganda. It was just goofball central. Do you remember that?
I'll never forget it. And I knew immediately what it was. I have written the only positive, fun, and romantic book on World War I in the 20th century ever. That's a real job to do. The Forgotten History of World War I from the Dark Ages to 1939. Check it out. It's on Amazon on print and Kindle. Nice. And it's the most difficult thing to do because, if you take like World War II and Vietnam, or World War I and Vietnam are like the sad wars. And so when you do a story, it's got to be sad. World War II is the good war if it's in Europe, not if it's in the Pacific. But if it's in
Vietnam,
Europe,
is like everyone was just stoned out of their minds,
right.
Like it was in a
right. But in World War II, you can do Band of Brothers and all this stuff.
World War II is Valiant, yeah.
So I said, we're going to do this, but for World War I. And the reason I did it, I watched August 2013 was when it started. I watched War Horse. And I was like so saddened and disgusted with War Horse. I was like, if I was making War Horse, it would be about Benedict Cumberbatch and Tom Hiddleston, and they would have been like behind the German lines. It would have been like Inglourious Bastards meets Lawrence of Arabia. It would have been awesome. And so I said, well, why can't I do World War I that way? Well, okay, so if you're doing that,
Lawrence of Arabia was World War I, wasn't it?
He was.
Yeah, it was, but it was like it was like a detour, like a side quest.
I wanted to do that for the Western Front, and I did some stuff in the book too. But what I said was, okay, well, how are we going to do this? So when we're not going to focus on stalemates, and so what happened was when the war would be going bad for the Allies, I would start focusing on like a Victoria Cross winner or a Medal of Honor, like a tactical action that went right when the whole operational picture was going wrong. And then like a couple years later, I was reading about Joseph Goebbels and how he would run the propaganda machine in Germany. And he would do the same thing. So when the war started going bad on the Eastern Front, he's like, all right, we're talking about heroic Panzer commanders, heroic Messerschmitt pilots, and kind of the movie Inglourious Bastards kind of is a play on that, where they're making a movie about the kind of fictional German Audie Murphy character. What's his name? They call him the Nation's Pride. And
Oh yeah.
where he shoots 200 American soldiers with his Mauser
Yeah.
rifle, and he's
Yeah.
and so it's like Goebbels understood that when your war is going badly, you focus on tactical heroics. And immediately when I was watching this stuff come out about Ukraine, I'm like, okay, this is going bad. That's why they're doing this Ghost of Kiev type stuff. It's like
you know what's curious? That's been the modus operandi of the Kim regime, of North Korea, and yet it's still afloat. I mean, we're only shown a curated piece of North Korea, but there have been North Koreans that have managed to get out of there, and they talk about it, and it just makes you wonder, how is it that the propaganda machine can persist this long and there not be a revolt? It's just it really, you almost gotta hand it to the regime that they're able to maintain that level of power, and keep the propaganda machine going, seemingly unmolested. Like, really, it's very interesting.
Well, and they're doing a good job in North Korea because, they're drawing their inspiration from the socialist realism that was taking place in the Soviet Union, which was, socialist realism was the name of the official literature and visual arts propaganda policy under Stalin. They call it socialist realism. Who was it? Maxim Gorky was a really big guy that was kind of like the pioneer of it. And by the way, all of these guys were interested in like magic and kind of, like these.
Yeah, there's the occultic element too, isn't there?
And so they talked about where they said, you look at that North Korean stuff and it's always positive, right? It's always a giant North Korean soldier smashing a little American soldier. And there's always solar imagery. The sun is everywhere. The sun is real bright. There's bright colors and all these different things. And there's the big and there's the little.
Really ornate stuff. I mean, it's some of it. I mean, it is pretty stuff. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not saying I'm I know I'm overly complimenting them at this point because there's a lot. There's also you could look into it, but it's behind the beautiful veneer. There's how it goes. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. And so, I would say an honest person has to link their facts up to their propaganda. But if you're not an honest person, don't link it, just divorce it. Right.
But it just amazes me. Like, you would think that the propaganda machine could only run its course for a certain time and then fall on its face, but they managed to do it for 3 generations. And I don't know the state of the, Kim Il, what was it? The first one, Kim Il Sung. Is that the first?
Yeah, I believe so.
I don't know. I don't know how rosy it was back in those days. But for 3 generations, they've managed to retain power in this way and keep it going. It's just really fascinating.
It's actually a pretty good theory, not to talk over you, Richard, but there's a theory that North Korea actually is on good terms with the United States government. And the only reason I entertain such a theory is I've known several communist dissident types that have gone to North Korea, but who are also working as informants for the federal government. So they were indeed socialist Workers' Party types, but they were also clandestine informants informing on their own party and stuff. So I don't know what connection it was, but I think it's very obvious that this was going on. They were known to be having in the past informed on their party and still be allowed in by the North Koreans and then back out. You're talking about the soldiers that actually they jumped the line and they became admitted. Is that what you mean? No. American people, American citizens, not soldiers, who were just wanting to have the socialist experience. Yeah. Going over to North Korea and then coming back out. And I found that very suspect. But also what I find suspect is that apparently the fat guy who is currently the dictator is going to be succeeded by his daughter, which
Yes.
does not sound very North Korean to me.
Right.
So
Well-
a lot of people believe that China, that the U.S. has closer ties with North Korea than we are led to believe, and is using it as a means of pressure against China. Just as
It
Iran
wouldn't.
is
I mean, it
pressure
wouldn't
against
surprise me, and also strategically to have that imminent threat going back to the promulgation of fear. The world is a stage, so at this point, something like that wouldn't surprise me in the least.
So,
Yeah.
Dr. Breck, that's really interesting that you've actually met some of these people. I've only ever seen one on Instagram. I watched this a few months ago. I was kind of shocked by it. And I don't remember her handle or her name, but she was like your white postmodern liberal college student, really interested in foreign affairs, who was regularly traveling over there and doing like a video blog that she was posting on Instagram. And I was like, I've never seen this. This is new. And she also had been like going to the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria before he fell. And so the whole thing was she was looking at their sports and their arts. And so, I mean, maybe these cases are, exactly what you're talking about. If you've actually met some of these people.
Well, I'll throw out a name, John Paul Cupp, C-U-P-P. And I don't know if he's still alive or around anymore, but he was in a lot of these underground circles, specifically on the left. But he also would post on National Socialist boards back in the day. And
yet, sorry.
Yeah, he was known to have gone to, and he used to hang out with Ron Paulers too. But he was known to have gone to North Korea, and it was a wonderful place in his book. He thought it was great. He took pictures with all the soldiers and did all that. But the point is, he was also an informant in the United States. So it makes you wonder how stupid the North Koreans were to let him in.
And you also wonder too, like, if they're running a propaganda experiment that's working, like, are some of our people going over there and are like, hey, so tell us how it's being done.
Taking notes.
And you're what we do.
I really.
This will go to another talking point briefly, and I knew this guy as well. He's married to Fred Phelps's granddaughter now, and he was I think he was sent in specifically to break up the Westboro Baptist Church. But the Westboro Baptist Church taught a class at Quantico on how to handle basically hostile crowds for the agents. This is a matter of fact that you can look up. I'm talking about Fred Phelps and his immediate family. They went into Quantico to teach a class to the agents in training on how to handle the crowds, hostile crowds.
What year was this, Dr. Breck?
Probably like 2008, 2009. I can find a source for this, but the point of the matter,
because I used to live in Stafford, right outside of Quantico.
Yeah.
My dad worked at Quantico, so I'm pretty familiar with that area.
I'll look it up. But the point of the matter is, this guy I know who was also a federal informant, he at some point he was an Iraqi war vet, and then he went, and we used to mock him all the time for being pro-war. I called him Jackboot. That was my nickname for him. Mm-hmm. And then he went hard anti-war all of a sudden and joined. It's like, what happened? You were gung-ho. I loved killing Iraqis. I've just had it. And now you're going out with Westboro and saying God hates the troops. And
haven't we seen these homegrown characters all of our lives? These Richard Spencers and these, who's the one, how dare you, that gal, and then the David Hogue and there's so many of these characters that are just, they go through the actors pipeline, and they trade hats. They'll one day be a red pillar, and then the next day they'll be a this, and
there's even more to it. I don't know if you've ever watched the interview of the woman the granddaughter that left. Joe Rogan interviewed her. But when he was with Westboro, he had an affair with her and her sister simultaneously. I think he ended up marrying the sister, so that girl left Westboro, but it caused so much consternation in the church that Fred Phelps' successors lost a lot of clout, and that's why Westboro basically went away. But I'm telling you the kind of the backstory on, and I think he just married and settled down with the other sister, and the one sister left the church and left the family and the point is he caused enough trouble with his affair to basically cause the church to go quiescent.
So basically, the feds weaponized "Man Who Would Be King," the idea with Roxanne, and they're,
this is the underground story from me knowing him and knowing the whole background and stuff he told me firsthand.
I believe this, and honestly, I'm going to tell you this. You're going to hear it here first. I've been watching just today. And I was talking with a friend about it, and I've been researching it today. This is what I was doing at Applebee's before I got on here. This guy, Joe Kent, who recently left the director of national intelligence office under Tulsi Gabbard, who went on the Sean Ryan show recently. And I'm convinced the story you just told is the exact same story, because here you have this guy and he's really supportive of it and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden 180 degrees, my conscience says I can't do this. And it's like, what? That's a little odd. And, everybody loves to have a real American soldier for political points on their side because the optics are great. If you think about it from a moral optics standpoint, you get a real, and I mean a real American soldier that was in combat, not somebody back on the base. I'm talking a real, and it's very interesting. It's very interesting. Another one that I would say, you were talking about Richard Spencer. I mean, look, Richard Spencer marries the smoking hot Russian goth woman whose name escapes me.
Talking about Irina.
Yes.
I can't pronounce her last name.
And wait, if you're thinking, is it Abramovich? No. No. I was gonna say no.
She's goth, but she's not hot. This one is this hot.
Like that would be a heck of a
crossover. No, not her, but this Russian woman. Okay. She was the protege of Alexander Dugin, top strategist. And if you read, and I did an article about this, you can go on my website. If you read, there is an English translation that floats around the internet that I have linked to of Alexander Dugin's book, 1996 Foundations of Geopolitics, the Kremlin Strategic Handbook. And he says, we need to infiltrate the white nationalist movement of America and use it as a tool of division.
Well, that's just it. They're controlled opposition. They put and so a lot of these things we see in the media, like the tiki torches, they want to replace. That was such a, they're so sloppy. They all wear the khaki pants, the same boots. It just reeks of all these so-called events. Just reek of alphabet agencies,
when you literally have a guy saying what he'd like to do, and then his smoking hot protege marries the guy who then all of a sudden gets in the national spotlight and then leaves him, by the way, right? After a couple years of marriage, says he was abusive, all this stuff. And it's like,
here's the thing, Richard, not to interrupt you, but let me enlarge on what you're saying with Irina, because I followed this and I made a joke about it because I said Irina's next lover was a Chechen who was hunting. Now that I made that up, but she claims he's abusive.
You and Chechens
when she's pregnant. It's not possible for an American man to be abusive to a Russian woman. That's the bottom.
Hey, that's true. You're right about that.
Hey, she was posting all this Ramzan Kadyrov, basically pornography to women. She'd post Ramzan Kadyrov workout videos on Twitter back in the day. There is no way he was abusive to her. So I'm just putting that out there. Irina Kupriyanova. I probably, that's
Yeah.
Hey, listen, if Arena is watching, I am single and I love Russians.
You do.
And I'm not abusive. So, hey,
And I
she
could
might
be
be
bought, I
watching.
could be bought and paid for. There's a price for
Right.
everything.
Wolfrenessance.com.
Put your copious skills to use,
Right. Content creators, welcome.
That's funny.
She may be traumatized by the name Richard, Leanna said.
Maybe she needs to meet a good Richard. You know what I'm saying?
Well, here's the funniest part now that Richard is in a relationship with Radfem Hitler, who is a Jewish woman, apparently. And they have a child together, too. So Richard has had a child with that Nina woman, and now he's had a child with this Jewish woman.
Huh.
So it's kind of funny how influential he's been on the right, because during the Ron Paul movement, he was such a negligible figure. There was a magazine that Steve Forbes started after 2008 called Culture 11, and he was wanting to influence the right arts, the arts and society and culture. So he called this magazine Culture 11, and he had all these bright young people, and Richard Spencer was one of the people on Culture 11, and then they folded the whole site and it disappeared. And it's never been, it's been memory hold. But don't they
repurpose these characters? They just give them a new coat of paint and put them out there, and they're an influencer. Like, I always thought Andrew Tate was interesting because there's literally nothing behind the guy, and then all of a sudden he blows up into a prominent, and maybe I don't know, maybe I'll strike a nerve with some of the viewers. But I just saw just sort of an inorganic rise, there. And there's been a lot of these people, and sometimes they take and sometimes they don't. Like that Charlie Kirk clone. Shortly after his assassination, you get this. What was that dude's name? They tried to push him out, took him out of the lab, and put him in front of us, and everyone was like, "Who the hell's it?" They rejected him like with frothing at the mouth.
I will tell you, we're telling true tales here. I will tell you a Charlie Kirk story. I saw Charlie Kirk speak when he was a small fry. This would have been like February or March of 2016. It was at CPAC 2016, 10 years ago at the Gaylord Hotel in Maryland, where they always hold CPAC, Conservative Political Action Committee. And he was speaking like in a back room to like 50 people.
What'd you think of him? Like, what was your impression?
I didn't like him at all. And it was really funny because at this time in the Republican primary, nobody liked Trump. At that time, I liked Trump. And it was funny. Me, and to the right of me was a 21-year-old girl who had been going to a private Baptist college in Ohio.
Yeah.
And she was this white girl who told me that they would have like the college only had like 1,000 students, and they would have like Bernie Sanders marches of like half the students through the campus. The guy sitting to the left of me is an 18-year-old Latino high school senior from Montana. And we're the only three people in the room that like Trump. Everybody else likes Ted Cruz. And so Charlie Kirk gets up there, and Charlie Kirk is like, "Oh, Donald Trump is the devil. He's a destruction of the conservative movement. Like Ted Cruz is the man." And I was like watching, he's like, I kind of got this sense he was kind of like an SA type stormtrooper, was kind of like, how like you see those guys where they're just like, and he was really proud he never went to college. And he's like, we harassed these Democrat senators and we shoved the camera in their faces and all this stuff. And blah, 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 blah. This wasn't the, Charlie Kirk that came out later. And when he would say something negative about Trump, me and the girl and the Latino guy would boo him. And then the other students would boo us. And I'd laugh so hard. I was like, don't you guys know? Like, I'm the only one that can like Trump. You're a girl. You're a Latino. You guys can't like. We laugh so hard. And so anyway, the next year I went to CPAC in 2017 again. Yeah. Now Donald Trump has just been inaugurated. And Charlie Kirk's now on the big stage. He loves Donald Trump. Donald Trump's his best friend. Last best hope for America. And Ted Cruz, I kid you not, was in the hallway trolling for selfies with college students. And I ran into him and I was like, dude, you're Ted Cruz. He's like, yeah, I am. I'm like, can I get a picture with you? And he's like, yeah, we got a picture together. I got it on my old computer. And dude, he's the weirdest looking guy, man. His skin looks like rose.
He's like a
same height as me, really oily skin, and it's made of water. I was uncomfortable standing next to him, and he was uncomfortable standing next to me. We both have the weirdest look on our faces in this picture. But to me, I saw that. Okay, with my
you saw the transition, like, personally.
And it's not to say that,
because that's not the narrative that Charlie Kirk was a never Trumper. I don't think I've ever come across that, but that's interesting how if the prevailing thought is he's been on board, then they'll memory hole and they'll do what they do. And then, everyone forgets, right?
And I've told that story to people and they're like, there's no way that's true. I'm like, yeah. and I don't like, look, is it possible that he changed his views over time and it was sincere? Yes,
I think so. I think so. People do change. Yeah,
they do. Yeah. But I mean, there was, you can, I told somebody the other day, you can have a financial incentive and a sincere ideological.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Do what you love. You never work a day in your life, right?
Well, yeah, just look at Mike Pence, what a turncoat he was into the whole thing, where he just I still fight with my brother over this, where he's like, he did what was right, and I'm just like, we couldn't just send it back to the state legislatures to recount the votes and those respective. I mean, that's well within the VP. That's a separate topic, but just the turncoat nature of that guy, like where you say I think that would be the what you're describing. That phenomenon. I think that perfectly is encapsulated in Pence.
And I will tell you another story that encapsulates what you're saying about Mike Pence. This is another one. So from a forum, because Dr. Breck is a forum guy, right? I was on a place called MeWe. MeWe for a while this would have been early 2018. So like maybe January, February, if my memory serves me correctly. No, excuse me. It would have been early 2019. That's what because I was working at the YMCA at that time. And so like January, February 2019. And I had MeWe was being billed as like a conservative Facebook. And they had a conservative writers and artists group on there that I was a part of. And it was a lot of libertarians doing science fiction. And there was like one guy on there that liked pulp stuff but everybody else, it was just kind of, it was, I did a couple of crossover pieces on my old website with somebody, a girl named Caroline Furlong, who I promoted a few of her pieces on my old website, mindatwar.org. I don't know. She's still around. She still publishes. What's that? You know her?
Yeah.
You know her like personally?
No, but I've read something by her aside from what you published.
She's pretty good. I liked her. She's like a Catholic gal who was, pretty good storyteller and story structure and stuff. And I think that the pieces I promoted of hers were like 3 different types of female heroines, which I thought was pretty good. But anyway, I was in this group and there was a lady who joined the group who had gotten fired by Ben Shapiro because she had been one of her tweets that she was in kind of a Twitter engagement with an LGBTQ activist. And she was, being pro family values and, pretty respectful. Ben Shapiro didn't like the optics and he said, it's bad and fired her. And you see that this is early 2019. Okay. Fast forward a few years where the Daily Wire is basically built on the back of the anti-transgender crusade. Okay. And you're like, what the heck happened? Right. So I think these movements, it's funny to watch them, like I followed the Nick Fuentes thing early, like 2019. I remember seeing what he was like. Who is this guy? His kind of competition he was having with Charlie Kirk and, you know, wanting to take over the movement and all this different stuff. And it's fascinating that, like, you know, years later, I again, 2022 early, you know, we're talking like February, March. I'll never forget Charlie Kirk saying something along the lines of, like, you know, white majority America. And I was like, well, you were firing people for saying that stuff in, you know, the days.
Yeah, a little hypocritical, right?
And then they're saying this stuff, and then, you know, Ben Shapiro's going on all this transgender stuff, and so
I see it. I see it with the COVID thing, where, you know, there were so many, even the Rand Pauls, you know, of whom I was a Rand Paul guy in 2016, you know, and all that, for that election. But you know, you hear, like, you hear these folks that are seemingly on our side. A lot of these conservative commentators, these Republican sort of personalities, but then they'll slip in these little. I'm not saying don't go get the, you know, the shot. Of course, you got to stay, you know, you got to stay healthy for grandma, you know, and all that. And so they'll slip that in, and it's just, and then they'll, you know, years down the road, then they're going to speak up about it. And it's just like,
right.
How about consistency?
And
I see it also with, you know, I know you guys might have opinions on the Iraq war, but there's a lot of folks that were not that at that very time, they were all pro Iraq war. And now all of a sudden they're sheepish about it. I was never for it. I was never for locking people down during COVID. And it's like, well, the difference between the Iraq war thing and now with the COVID debacle, with all that nonsense, the forced mass, and let's put people in internment camps, and let's, you know, lock people out and lose jobs. I'm one of those casualties, by the way. Lost a pretty good career in my network with it. The internet now, your conduct is now preserved, and the internet doesn't. You know, it's the internet is forever, they
Right.
say. So
At the same time, Charlie Kirk got to change his positions multiple times and get away with it. And what's funny is
rules
Nick
for thee, not for me, right?
yeah, Nick Fuentes blocked me in 2017 for calling him homosexual, and at the same time I said something like Charlie Kirk's.
You would do that, wouldn't you?
Well, I called him a twink faggot or something. But, anyway,
That's marginally better.
I kind of my post was something like, I kind of like Nick Fuentes even though he's a twink faggot, but Charlie Kirk is just a dumb non-entity, and of course how wrong I was about that, because
Oh yeah,
the day he's
going to be on our currency. Mark my words.
He was killed. I walk into the grocery store and everyone is in mourning, and the staff manager comes up to me and tells me Charlie Kirk got shot, and I have to act like I care. And it was and it's like Charlie Kirk won in the end, because now I'm having to acquiesce to public opinion because this guy is really big.
Well, you know, what I think is interesting is that you have. I noticed this. You noticed this, Dr. Breck. Another good friend of mine who I've known for about 13 years noticed this. I didn't think Charlie Kirk was as popular as he was.
Yeah, exactly.
Because like, and I got nothing against him, but it's kind of like basic stuff like work a job, work hard, don't beat your wife. Like, it's like,
yeah, it was very milky toast.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of like, you know, learn how to tie your shoes. Like, it wasn't like groundbreaking stuff, but the fact that this resonated with people so much, I mean, I think it goes to show how sad of a society we live in, that like basic functioning is considered revolutionary.
It's the same as Jordan Peterson, you know, Jordan Peterson. Yeah. Common sense.
Stock shelves, and they were like in mourning, and they're like and I say hi to them when I come in, because they're like whatever. It's like they're in mourning, and they are the most blue collar, bottom tier labor good guys, but I mean, they're how do they even know about Charlie Kirk? I was shocked.
Well, and well, they're guys that, like work hard,
Yeah,
don't beat their wives, are basic good dudes. And
yeah,
that was the brand Charlie was propagating.
yeah.
When the stuff that he was talking is radical, that's when, like you said, Richard, that's when we've got a deeply sick society where something like that, like this, the tenets he was espousing, just which was really just baseline milky toast common sense, not so common, right?
Well, and I love that all these, left-wing people were like, oh man, I'm so glad this fascist is dead. And I'm thinking, you've clearly never actually talked to a real fascist before.
Yeah, it's like, one of the most bizarre parts of their outrage. And, it's just like they call Trump a pedophile because of his alleged interactions with Epstein. And it's like, you really lead a very sheltered life.
Right.
But, Leanna made a good point to me just now a moment ago. She said, this is how their books don't get finished. We deviate from the topic to such a degree.
That's a great point.
There's so many wonderful things to say. That's the problem. Well, you know what the issue is? There's just not enough people working on all these problems, and we've all got to work overtime, working multiple jobs of the imagination and the intellect. It's
we're a bunch of cackling hens.
We have a brain trust here.
We do.
We don't get any funding for our brain trust.
Right. That's right.
One thing I'd like to say is I would like to have this discussion again. Not that I'm trying to shut you down. Let's proceed. But I'd like to bring in James Edwards, who James just wrote that review of his book, The Operators. James,
abstract operator.
I think James would have a lot of perspective on this subject.
I would love to talk to him. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Is he like the Gen X guy that kind of does the yoga stuff, but also the combat stuff? Okay. Yeah, because I'd read his website a little bit. He'd be really interesting to talk to because I can't quite figure out where he's coming from. But then again, like, I don't know.
He's a big Carlos Castaneda fan. I think he kind of views him as an American Evelyn.
I've never even heard of that guy. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question here, Richard, and any of Dr. Brack and Leanna? As we're talking, it feels like we didn't touch on the meme magic component of this, which I think all throughout the last perhaps decade, that has been a thing, and it's almost almost a vital piece of this discussion. Unless you guys want to, close it out, but
this is perfect. I'm good to keep going if you guys are.
Yeah. I wasn't trying to cut it off. I was just saying we need to have this discussion again with more people as well.
With friends like the Magnificent Seven.
Yeah.
More people on this. I like it. Okay, so have you ever read the book? Dr. Breck probably has, because Dr. Breck is like one of maybe 3 people that has read all the books I have, and the other 2 are James LaFond and Lloyd DeYoung. Okay.
No, I'm behind you guys. I mean,
I don't know, but Tyler,
wish I could read more.
Tyler, you're like a dark horse because you just come out of left field with like something wacky and like, so I don't know. But
a lot of academia has spoiled my brain.
Have you ever read the book entitled The King in Orange by John Michael Greer?
No, I have not.
Have you read that book, Dr. Breck?
No, but I'm familiar with it and John Michael Greer's work.
Yes, I read that book in December of 2024. And John Michael Greer, by the way, is a practicing druid. Okay, a druid magician, the real deal. I think he's up in somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, I think. And he wrote a book specifically about magic and memes, meme magic,
right,
in the context of the 2016 election.
Oh, interesting. He's covered it.
He did, and it really fascinated me. He's not an Evolian, right? He's a little more kind of a Jungian because he's kind of more, and he really likes the American Indian earth nature stuff because he's a druid. It kind of goes with the territory.
Yeah.
But a very, very prescient guy who's very knowledgeable. I think that if I were to look at memes from my own perspective, it seems to me that memes are a modern day form of simplified propaganda posters that are specific to the cultural context of the 21st century. What do I mean by that? Well, most people would say, oh, they're specific because they're distributed across social media. No. That's just the distribution channel. I want to look at the content. If we go back and we look at the literary scene of the last 100 years in the Western world, particularly in America, we have these ideas, 2 primary schools of literary thought. And when you understand these, you really understand everything. Modernism and postmodernism. And when we look at the literary school of modernism, what are the hallmarks of the literary school of modernism? 3 things. I've written about this before: ambiguity, irony, and paradox. And the big one to me is irony, philosophical irony. Isaiah Berlin talked about this idea of philosophical irony extensively in his book, The Roots of Romanticism. The Roots of Romanticism was a lecture he gave, I believe it was like a 10-part lecture he gave at the Andrew W. Mellon Center. And he never published it as a book in his lifetime because he said he didn't truly understand the phenomena of 19th century Romanticism enough to write a book about it. But the book his speeches were published as a book after his death. It's pretty widely available at like Barnes and Noble and like the literary section, things of that nature. The idea of philosophical irony is basically the hallmark of what you see, everything's ironic. Everything, if you see something that's sincere, you blow it up, you do a complete 180 degrees on it. You guys are children of the 1990s. If you're 39 years old, much of the movies in the 1990s were really consciously playing ball with the idea of philosophical irony from modernism. Because what happens is the stuff, you see it in the philosophy and the literature, it takes a while to get into the movies as a medium. Okay. There's like a trickle down and it takes a while, a couple decades or so. So what you see is that this idea of philosophical irony, I would argue, in the post-Cold War period in America is one of the major pieces of glue that holds American culture together, along with rap music. Okay. And I say that with all sincerity. Now, personally, I detest philosophical irony with every ounce of my being. Okay, because I'm a sincere person and I do things sincerely. So, but philosophical irony is, everybody loves it. Memes are philosophically ironic in the way they're presented. Of course, they also act as a political cover. It's just a meme. It's supposed to be ironic. It's edgy. It's all these things. But it's a tool of destruction, right? And if you look at, go back.
Would this be like the natural next iteration of political cartoons of the past?
100%. Yeah, political cartoons are kind of ironic, right? But
and they're quick, right? They're just a quick dissemination of an idea.
Right. Memes are like, black tar heroin that's got the fentanyl in it. It's like
highly concentrated.
Highly concentrated, right? And so what you see
poignant, like the NPC meme, right? It's so perfect,
And so when you look at these ideas, these are great tools for a revolution. When you go and you look at the Russian Revolution in the days of the Bolsheviks, and this ties back into what we were discussing earlier, the Bolsheviks, many of their people were these modernist artists. And those are the kind you want philosophically ironic people to destroy a regime. They're great revolutionaries. The problem is you can't have them around when your regime is established because all they do is destroy sincere things. So Stalin killed all these people.
That's the whole idea is you first to get up against the wall, correct?
Right.
That's exactly the idea, the useful idiots.
And in a lot of ways, like I'm not a communist or any of that, but like I would be more philosophically inclined to agree with Stalin because Stalin is promoting the heroic and the sincere in his socialist realism, whereas somebody like Trotsky and those cats were, philosophically ironic. So what you
Well,
see,
you could tickle the ears of the populace and have completely subversive or once you're in office or you've assumed power, then you do a complete 180 or what have you.
and what's interesting is that if you read Francis Parker Yockey, his entire thesis, and remember, he's an art and philosophy guy from Chicago, okay? And if you read, the underlying theme of all of his stuff is that Europe needs to ally with the Soviet Union, specifically because they're coming from an artistically sincere and philosophically sincere place based on deductive reasoning. Whereas the United States is moving in to this modernist ethos of ambiguity, irony, paradox. You're seeing this with Freudian psychology and things of this nature. So what you often see is that when you look at the Steve Bannon has talked about pretty extensively that, he was a big strategist with the memes. And his phrase was, I quote, "We need to flood the zone with shit." Okay. And if you ever
interesting. Wow.
If you read the book entitled War for Eternity, Inside Steve Bannon's Far Right Circle of Power Brokers by Benjamin R. Toddlebaum, which was published in, I believe, was it 2019 or 2020? Steve Bannon gave extensive interviews in this book to Benjamin R. Toddlebaum, and he is an avowed Rene Guignon, Julius Evola traditionalist and talks about it very openly. So he understands the philosophical, spiritual, and artistic implications of what he's doing.
So you've got that camp, but what of the 4chan community, the 4chaners, because I say this because the whole idea there, historically, is sort of the history behind the role of 4chan and Pepe the Frog and and all that is that they literally memed Trump into office is what they'd tell you. Select 4chaners, and that there was activity brewing around candidate Trump leading up to 2016. So is there, I guess, which one begets the other? Was the Steve Bannon, did the Steve Bannon camp, is it just they right place at the right time, or they were welcomed into the Trump campaign?
I think they were, I think probably this would be my assertion. And then I would be curious to see your thoughts, Dr. Brett, because you have a lot more in the trenches experience on this than I do. I would argue that probably Steve Bannon's people were coordinating these things on 4chan. I don't think it was organic. Like, I don't believe that any insurgency, whether military or political, is organic. I really don't.
Right.
And that's now that doesn't mean
I'll be honest with you. I'm actually, the older I get and the more I study this stuff, the more I'm inclined to believe that these candidates and perhaps presidents are already pre-selected. And so where we see the incongruencies or we see the sort of the red flags with regards to election fraud, that's just this thing has become too unwieldy now that they just have to outright steal it. Perhaps that's something I've considered.
I think so too. And even if they're not pre-selected, the preparatory work goes much longer than what you see. I would say 1 decade or more earlier. These ideas have to incubate. And Dr. Breck, you've talked about that a lot of these forums, such as 4chan, are used to incubate ideas.
Well,
and then it's like a test pilot program. And
containment program. Yeah.
Right. And then you're like, you kind of pick what you like and what works, and then you start distributing it more broadly. I mean, a lot of the stuff.
I did a broadcast several years ago called Steve Bannon's Internet, and I think I took it down. But it was based on the idea that there was a forum years ago called Liberty Forum. We're talking 2003. And supposedly Steve Bannon posted on it, but it was started by a mysterious figure, a libertarian figure named John Deere. And John Deere had this idea of e-gold, which was like a proto Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, he's from. Okay, this is the Vermont guy, correct? Or New Hampshire?
This was
Where
like before the Vermont guy.
they went after him hard,
Yeah,
didn't they?
John Deere disappeared from his own forum. He started Liberty Forum and he disappeared. But a lot of heavy hitters like Niccolo Salo, I can't think of what he calls himself, Fisted by Foucault on Twitter.
Is that the Liberty coin? Is that what it was called?
Oh no, this was
no.
This was very early on. This was 2003. But anyway, Steve Bannon supposedly posted on that site as Westpac Sailor.
Fascinating.
And
he was a Navy guy too.
Yeah, and he was very. I remember him being on that. If that was him, Westpac was like a generic conservative, and it was mostly a libertarian forum, but as time went on, it got taken over by the nationalists, and it was an example of how libertarians can't even hold their own turf. Because
the same phenomenon occurred with 4chan, I believe, where it went from, there were a lot more libertarians, and then it became more of the National Socialists.
But yeah, I think you're right. I think
still a smorgasbord of different political persuasion. And also feds are highly active there, too. So.
Yeah, I think Bannon actually did what Barrett described and used the example of Liberty Forum to seed 4chan with his meme stuff and pro-Trump stuff. And part of my perspective on this is I used to try to appeal to 4chaners on my videos. So I would start my broadcast, greetings, this is the High Priest of Keck.
I remember.
Broadcast that you don't deserve. And that's what I was trying to do, is reach out to the 4chaners, which I did have some small success that I really wished I hadn't. Because
they're schizos.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is, I think Bannon was behind that, and he was also friends with the guy in the Philippines who did the 8chan. And the point is, it's all connected if we get back to it. But I think Bannon started studying the whole forum dynamics as early as 2003, and as I was, because we all got kicked out of Free Republic back in 2003 area, and that's when they started making these breakaway forums, and
this is why North Korea has the internet on lockdown. It is an intranet closed system. There's your answer. Why they've been able to do what they do.
We're not even touching it. That's what they say. That's really interesting, Dr. Breck, because I think that, so we're looking at this from, say, a political insurgent perspective, but when you look at it from the establishment regime perspective, we see the same process, just in different locations. What I learned in going to college, what became clear to me, so I went to 2 different schools. My first 2 years of college, I went to University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And then my family and I moved to another state. And so then you couldn't get in-state tuition unless you lived in the state for a year. And I was getting really sick of things and I wanted to finish it. So I finished my degree at Regent University with their online.
Cool. New Jersey, right?
No, Regent University is in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Sorry.
Yeah, so that's where, so my degree is in political communications. And what I found interesting was that at the University of Mary Washington, I've written a few pieces about this and I've talked about it extensively with people who know me personally, is that these ideas on the left were being incubated at the university level, for bachelor's degree students.
Oh, yeah.
These ideas that would later be identified as woke. And so I was there from 2014 to 2016, and I was coming home and I was telling my mom and dad, I was like, hey, this stuff is insane. This is bad. It's coming down the pipeline. We're educating everybody in it. This is going to be bad.
Yeah, I remember when Evergreen College, if you remember, in state of Washington, where it was getting real, it was front and center. You could see it, and it was just like, oh, this is just going to percolate into the whole university system, and and this is how color revolutions are
100%.
managed.
Let me ask you a question, Richard.
Mm-hmm.
Political communications. What made you decide not to be involved in the political realm and end up being a staffer or whatever? Or
I worked in the Mitt Romney campaign in 2012. And I was very sad because I was 17 and I was really frustrated. I couldn't vote. And, you know, I'm a very like, as everybody who knows me knows, I'm a very like, you know, John Wayne, World War II, I got to do my part kind of person.
Yeah.
So, you know, and so I worked that campaign at a phone bank center. You know, I wasn't really in love with that. We lived outside of Northern Virginia for quite a while. And, you know, I would go and I was going to CPAC. I was going to these different things. And my big interest is like, I'm fundamentally interested in the Middle East. And I'm like, my views aren't very popular on this. I'm pro Iraq war. I'm pro Afghanistan war. Like, I'm pro all these things. I like George W. Bush. I'm like the only guy who will probably say it other than his wife and daughters, maybe Michelle Obama now. I don't know. But, you know, so like to me, it's very consistent. And I that was becoming not popular. The libertarian thing was becoming popular. I was not interested in that. And so I was kind of trying to find my space. And it was really funny. I worked at the Middle East Forum as an unpaid intern for 1 year from September 2018 to June of 2019. I had graduated by then, but I was like, hey, I'm working as an intern. And I had applied for a paid position, Islamism in Politics coordinator. And I wrote a 15-page report about my strategy, what I would do. And I predicted a lot of these things that have taken place politically in the last few years, because I said, hey, this is where this is going. They weren't interested in me. They went with another guy, Benjamin Baird, who was an Iraq war hero. And, you know, that's hard to compete with, right? And it was really funny that you say that, because like just this weekend, I went and like reread the report I wrote. And, you know, it's very accurate. And I looked at what Benjamin Baird had done with the organization, and it was more of the same of what they were doing. Not a lot. And so I was frustrated by this, and I was just like, I don't care. So I applied for that position, because then I wrote the date on it, June 20th, 2019. I think like it was July when they told me, no, you didn't get it. And I remember where I was at. My brothers were champion pistol and carbine shooters in high school. And we had gone to the national tournament in Ohio, and we were in a Golden Corral. Okay. We were in line at Golden Corral, and it's just us and a bunch of Amish people at a Golden Corral in Ohio. And literally I'm standing in line, like in the foyer, and I'm checking my email on my phone. Sorry, Richard, not going with you, dude. And I'm just like, what the heck, man? I was like, you know,
They might have done you a favor, though. Truth be told, you know,
the reality was, I don't think they wanted somebody like me. And so when that happened, I was like, another thing that had become an issue, right, was that I'd never heard about any of this distant stuff until the Charlottesville deal happened in 2017.
yeah.
Like, right, who are these people? Never even heard of them. Because like, if you weren't interested in Middle East warfare, I wasn't interested in you. Okay. So, and those guys are not. So, you know, so I was like, I never even heard of them. So I go on the Southern Poverty Law Center, and, you know, they've got like the who's who, the gallery. And I start looking these guys up, and I particularly, and I'll say this openly. I didn't want to say it for a long time, but I really like the writings of Jared Taylor.
Yeah.
Jared Taylor,
American Renaissance. I'm familiar, and I respect a lot of what he says. Yeah.
And what I thought was interesting is that, you know, I had been looking at tribalism and tribal warfare in the Arab context for a long time. And my second book is about that. All Men Follow the Strong Man, The Forgotten History of the Iraq War. I wrote that in 2015. And what I found interesting was that I had never seen anybody look at these ideas of tribalism from a biological perspective. And essentially that's what Jared Taylor does. And I thought, hey,
Yeah,
this
well, what I get from him is folks want to be around like folks, and we
right.
should organize in accordingly if we so choose, and not be forced to intermingle. And that's such a controversial thing these days. But then he grew up in Japan,
Right.
and the Japanese way, and nobody bats an eye when it comes to Japan. They want to remain Japanese. And so maybe that was formative on him. I can't speak for him, but that's really what he's espousing, and he makes it abundantly clear. And he's got friends who are black. He's got friends. They call him a racist, but he's got great friends of all different ethnicities and whatnot, and backgrounds, and and it's this mutual respect that hey, I like folks in X demographic, but I would rather prefer to live amongst my own. What's wrong
Well,
with that?
and what I found interesting with him was that, there was a deal where they were like, the left was really pushing the racial thing hard. And they're like, if all of your heroes look like you're a racist. And so I'm pulling up like John Wayne, Rod Taylor, Michael Caine. They look like me.
Yeah.
Oh no. What? And so like, oh no, am I a monster? Right? That's the American like, no, it can't be true.
Well, and you're also in higher ed where that is just
right.
ramrodded down your throat, and so it's like
I'll never
to
forget.
that point. Not to interrupt you, Richard, but it's my sense that the political communications degrees, like you went for, are in general marginalized anymore. The people who graduated with those specific degrees are marginalized, either only used for intern labor or for honorary positions wherein you don't have any clout or ability to do anything because
Yeah. I've seen
those
that.
positions have largely lost any authority. And then on the other side that I have familiarity with is in the field of campaigns, wherein we don't really have serious campaigns anymore in primaries and stuff. It's all just pretty much imaginary. So we don't need hard-hitting people out in the field doing important stuff. Like phone banking is kind of a joke in my book.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the conclusion I came to from doing it.
Yeah,
I was like, why are we doing this?
The point is, it just seems that degree and those people that get those degrees, a lot of them skew left.
Oh,
But it just seems like that whole class of people has been basically subjugated, and as they grow older, I don't know how the current system, a younger, like 20s, early 20s, getting those degrees.
Yeah, when I was in DC, I knew quite a few, and it was one of those things where highly competitive, everyone vying for a very small window of opportunity there. And so, we mentioned this in the last, we were talking a little bit about the poli-sci majors in our last broadcast, and I made the comment that, you got to get in line. And then, a lot of the folks I knew that had political ambitions, that graduate from like American University or what have you, these George Mason, all these schools with poli-sci degrees, they just ended up they did their Mr. Smith Goes to Washington experience, as did I, albeit from a different angle. I was doing like veteran service organizations on the national level. Dang, I'm really outing myself, but whatever. At this point, I'm so blacklisted. It's whatever. But and then they kind of move on. But nevertheless, I think you still gain valuable tools and experiences, and you can find yourself in a variety of other industries or circumstances.
Well, what I found that I could have graduated as dumb, if not dumber, than when I came in, if I so chose to. I obviously didn't choose to do that, but it was very. You're right about it. And if you've ever lived, in the D.C., Northern Virginia, or Maryland area, it is exactly like you described. And it was old Andrew Breitbart said in his book was pretty accurate. He grew up on the West Coast in California and Hollywood, and he's like, DC is the Hollywood of the East Coast.
Yeah.
Very true. It's very true.
You get exposed to
you do.
I wouldn't trade the experience. It's a young man's game, though. I'll say that. It's not for raising a family,
And you have to, you have to ride the wind, the political wind.
Yeah.
And that's not my thing. That's not what I'm about. Hey, if the political wind aligns with my thing, right on, let's do it.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, though, it's like, I'm going to keep doing my thing regardless. And, it was becoming increasingly clear that, people were not interested in these things. And I think fundamentally, and I'd be curious to see what Dr. Breck says on this. So I'll wait for this for when he comes back. But, there are a lot of people, I live in the Midwest now, and it's where I'm at. It's not my home, but it's where I'm at, long story short. And what I find interesting is that there are so many of these people that are middle America people. They have zero concept of how things are being done in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah.
And
the think tanks and the blatant disregard. They call the Midwest flyover country, and they scoff at middle America. I remember that clear as day. I'm also not, you're not alone. I'm also a transplant. I'm not from the Midwest, but we make do.
Hey, you do what you got to do, but Dr. Breck, I will say this. I am curious though, one of the things that I've noticed is one of the reasons I started getting into a lot more of the philosophy and the esoteric stuff was to kind of make sense of my experiences in these arenas, what's kind of the underlying logic behind it. And it seems to me that when you look at something like libertarianism, it's primarily what Evola would call a merchant caste phenomena, because it's primarily interested in the acquisition and maintaining of resources at all costs.
Tyler and I were talking about doing a broadcast about just libertarianism, and just briefly talking about it. I feel like libertarianism is a massive cope, as you say, by the merchant class.
And that was why I could never get on the libertarian bandwagon. Like, my dad was in law enforcement. All my mentors were military people. So like, I like the warrior caste thing. I mean, the whole website's the Indo-European warrior caste, right? So like, I never liked that Rand Paul was against the war on drugs. I'm like, why would you be for criminals? I never liked that Rand Paul was against the war on terror. Why would you be for the terrorists? I'm a black and white person, right? Like, and so like that's how my brain works. And like, when you see I think it's the John Quincy Adams quote, where he says, like, America doesn't go abroad to find dragons to slay. We wish everybody good. And I'm like, what the heck? I mean, my whole theme of my website is the knight slays the dragon, saves the princess. What the heck? That's the mythology. There's no Rex Nemorosis in this idea, right? And so the merchant caste is like, dude, that dragon's got a lot of gold. Let's trade with him, and we got some like maybe nitrous fuel that could make his fire more effective, and we'll give him some of that for some of his gold. And I'm like, to me, I'm not interested in that, right? And so, but the big thing was, okay, I've had a lot of health problems, so it's like, crap, dang it, can't do the military thing. That's frustrating. So then I started getting into the health and the fitness and the combat sports fields and the blue collar world, because it's like, okay, well, if my limiting factor is the body, well, let's see what we can do with the body. Let's push this, and we'll kind of see what happens. And so that's this winding kind of path I've taken. But which led me to James LaFond and you guys. I mean, I had
magic.
It's magic. We got a high priest of Keck in here. And he's gracing us with his presence. We don't deserve it, but he does.
He memed himself into existence back in 2017.
He did. But what I love about James LaFond's stuff was that, James LaFond is dealing with essentially the same kind of counterinsurgency environment that military people overseas were dealing with the war on terror, and that law enforcement people were dealing with domestically. He's in the ghetto with a large hostile foreign population. He wrote a book called Waking Up in Indian Country. And it's how he deal with that. And so that was what really drew me to this. And then I find out he's drawing a lot of inspiration from Pulp Fiction, which I've always loved. And I'm like, it just makes sense. And so a lot of people
have that. I share that nexus as well, which is great because there's literally nobody who gives a damn about Pulp Fiction otherwise, you know.
And what a lot of people that I know in my life, and also we've had some viewers too that are like, dude, you and James LaFond are like so different. Why are you guys friends? And I'm like, dude, look past the veneer.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
At the substance, right? The substance is there. And so, like, I mean,
I like interesting people. I can, you know, I could get along with, I was talking with, you know, Dr. Breck earlier, where it's just like some of my circles are largely left wing. I do game development. I do a number of other things. I have hobbies, and if you don't want to be a hermit and you want to actually talk about these things and the mechanics and, you know, some of the fun stuff, you can overlook these things and just enjoy the enjoy the things that you share. So that, I guess that's a bit of a white pill there, you know.
I will say this, you know, I'm definitely not a left-wing person if you guys haven't put the pieces together. But you know, what I have a lot of respect for the left because they are intellects and their logic is consistent. Because again, I said there are two movements, right, in literature in the 20th century and the 21st century in America. One is modernism, which we discussed. The other one is postmodernism. And the idea of postmodernism, a lot of people mistake postmodernism. They say, well, postmodernism means we're going to destroy all narratives and it's just chaos. No. Okay, that's one guy's interpretation of postmodernism. What's his name? Lyon. I don't remember his name. But if you read the writings of Henri Lacan and Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, and all my European friends are going to be making fun of my French here, but that's okay. I speak French first best, you know, although the Apache. But these guys, you know, they're very clear. They're saying, no, postmodernism, all it is, it's a flip. It's an inversion. It's an inversion of your traditional Western society. And they're building it on the building blocks of race and gender and class and sexuality. But we're just flipping it. So if the Indians were bad, now the Indians are good. If the men used to be good, now the men are bad. If the straights,
I do see that in terms of the stacking of virtues, where now it's more immutable attributes and it's victimhood versus merit and think
about this from a philosophical level, okay? So immutable attributes are being related to the concept of being, noun in a sentence, subject. Attributing things to merit is being, now we're looking at the verb, the action, the act itself. And what I would say is that, look, you have to have a being to conduct an action. You have to have a noun to act, for a verb to act, right? To conjugate. So if you look at it from a grammatical stance, you know, and grammar and philosophy is, I think, in a real sense, magic, because it's words and naming. And Julius Evola writes about this.
It's the words that we assign to things. Words certainly do have a power, as much as they certainly do. If you attribute,
You made a good point there, and as well, I wanted to address this Richard's point about leftism being more coherent right now, and I feel like that's because the right can't practice any form of rightism.
Correct.
And, somebody was saying, one of Lynn's friends brought up this. She said, true heterosexuality has never been tried, at least in our recent past. And,
that's funny. Listen, that's great.
And if Richard Spencer's ex-wife, the Russian, is interested in trying true heterosexuality, I am volunteering to take one for the team for the future of the heterosexual revolution, my comrades.
I really don't think you know what you're getting yourself into with a Russian woman, but in any case, the point is, though, really, we can't practice a rightist society and so forth. and so on. And so people don't have a concept of heroism or
They
anything
don't.
like that, or anything noble or righteous or character development. That's just disappeared in society in a very real way. In that you talk to the man on the street, they don't have a conception of anything higher or masculine or becoming or anything like this. The idea of the veneration of the woman and the Hollywood situation is their highest level. There's nothing beyond that. And so having that void in front of them, they don't really see any possibilities, which is awesome because you can then introduce them to the possibilities.
Hmm.
So it's like I use this analogy quite often with the religious people. I'm saying, why are you sending missionaries to Africa when McDonald County is full of heathens, literal heathens with rings in their noses, who
Yeah.
do not literally have any conception? They may never have even heard of Jesus Christ. We're talking about the generation since 2000 that's not been exposed to Christianity
Well,
in the
Yeah.
United States. So it's the same way with the right. People have lost these ideas and have never been exposed to them like Christianity and the Bible. So we can now expose them to this different scenarios and these different possibilities and this different literature that they have not had any contact with in their lifestyle.
in essence, now we are the insurgents. And this was a mentality shift that I've had to have that's been difficult for me. Prior to, say, the year 2000, we would have been the counterinsurgent, right? And because the counterinsurgent is the dominant regime, the insurgent is the guys trying to take power. And the reality is our worldview is not in power anymore. In the days of John Wayne, it was in power, but today it's not. And so that requires a real shift. When I made that shift, everything changed for me. And while I prefer to be the counterinsurgent, and I naturally think like that, maybe because, I'm of Norman ancestry and come from the ancestry of law enforcement people, right? But it's a lot of fun to be the insurgent. It's a lot of fun.
Well, my perspective is I was basically came around from the beginning to from the early militia movement forums, and basically deciding from a very young age that USG has been inhibiting my life and it needs to be overthrown. So that's the way I have gone about my life. It's been a very unsuccessful life, consequently, but it probably would have been equally unsuccessful had I tried to work with USG.
Hey, fellas, I'm sorry. I gotta go. I gotta run. It's been fun. It's been a delight. I gotta go. I'm getting swarmed at the moment, but it was a delight meeting you, Richard, finally. And thank you, Dr. Breck. I'm sorry for cutting it.
No problem. Have a good night.
We'll
You
see you
too.
later. TB. Good meeting you. Well,
Yeah,
Dr.
likewise. We'll see you soon.
See you
Bye-bye.
later. Well, Dr. Breck, I will add to that. There are people that say, should you join the military or law enforcement or do different things or not? And I say, make it work for you. It's like, whether you're in a civilian capacity or in a government capacity, it's like, I've had the mentality where it's like, you guys are going to do what I'm going to do, but I'm here to do what I want to do in the context of what I can, right? That's kind of how I approach every job. I look at, like if my job is to move mulch, yes, I'm moving mulch for the company, but I'm also doing it for my own purposes too, on the interior, on the inside, and I'm getting some spiritual value out of it, So I'm a glasses half full. I'm a glasses half full person in that respect.
I agree with you. Actually, now Younger had this perspective of the anarch as well. I think that you're
Right.
Talking about, but I have a good friend who is a few years older than you. He's between you and my age, and he actually joined the military a year ago and is now in military intelligence in Germany.
That's fantastic.
And he was like a handyman before then. And it's pretty funny. He's a black guy, but he's not American black. He's originally from Canada and the Caribbean, so he has much different perspective on race and so forth and so on. But the point of the matter is, yeah, I have pretty much supported his odyssey. And he was talking to me on the phone the other day. He's in Germany, and he can't talk too much about what he's doing. But basically, at this point is a great time to enlist, because if you are a semi-competent person, you are going to rise so far above the riffraff. So it is a good time, but there's a time and place for everything. And I think this would be the time for, if there were a lot of guys like your brother, which there aren't. There's your brother, and I'm sure there are other guys like your brother, but there are not, 100 guys like your brother who can go through military academy and then serve as officers and have some serious influence in the long-term administration. But it's there to be had, is the point. It is,
right, and I'm a believer in what Pericles said in Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. He says, the brave man knows the danger and the glory alike, and notwithstanding goes forth.
Yeah.
And when you count up things and the reality, and not just the reality of you could die from the action of the enemy, but also the reality of there's a danger of getting screwed over by your superiors, which is, a lot of people are more scared of that, than the enemy in many cases. If those things and you count them up and say, what, that I know the danger, I also know the glory. All right, let's do this thing. Like, I think it's great. I think it's a great thing. But you have to know, and it's a calling. It's a calling. And I told somebody that recently. I'm like, it's a calling like being a pastor or a missionary. Why? Because it's a job where you can die. Or, your regular job, the chances are low that you're going to die. You could also say it's a job where you could go to jail, and the chances are at a regular job is low that you'll go to jail. But if you know that and you still feel this is a thing, there's that, make it happen. And it's not just for the government or for the country, but it's also for your metaphysical self and ideals and transformation. I'm a big believer in that. And
yeah, I'll speak on my perspective during the war. Was that I was against the war, but I kind of liked the idea, and my dad was pressuring me to enlist, actually, believe it or not. And I kind of liked the idea of participating in a war. This was during the surge.
Oh, yeah.
And they were taking anybody at a.
Oh, yeah.
But I wanted to be an officer. They said, well, you have to go through this deal in high school. And I said, well, I'm not going in as an enlisted man. I want to be an officer. And I didn't realize all the back steps that are involved in life. It's like, I don't want to do anything special. I just want to be, I don't want to go in as an enlisted man. Is that too much to ask?
Well, it's not like the Civil War, where people were getting breveted left and right.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just saying, I probably would have ended up in an officer training school, but I didn't want to go in as a private. So,
well, and that's, it's interesting too, that you look at these things, and I don't know, I often wonder, like, God, why has my life gone the way it's gone? And I'm a believer that, he has a purpose and he has a plan, and there's a reason for it. There's a lot of things that I've been able to learn and see being adjacent to this thing, but coming from an outside perspective, that I know that if I was fully invested on the inside, I couldn't know and understand.
Yeah.
And so I think, well, okay, God, maybe that's for a reason. And, I think about this a lot. I have to understand the why of something. I don't like nihilism. I don't like chaos. I don't like any of that stuff. I don't like ambiguity. irony or paradox. Okay.
Yeah.
I am not a modernist. I'm a romantic. And, so those kind of things are that's what I think about. I think about that a lot. And, I know that God is not done with my life, and he's not done with your life, and he's not done with TB's life, and he's not done with anybody's life. It's not over until you're dead. And so, the question is, okay, well, what do we do? Where do we go? And I think that what the reality is, I've said this for a long time, that America is becoming more and more like the Middle East, not just in terms of demographics, but in terms of mentality, in terms of a mentality of tribalism, in terms of a mentality that venerates deception, in terms of a mentality that denigrates work and venerates leadership, and not like servant leadership, like tyrannical leadership. We are becoming more and more and more and more like that, whatever your color or whatever your creed is.
Well,
So I think many of the experiences and lessons that were learned by the people that have been involved in the war on terror are going to become increasingly relevant to American life today. And, I've seen nothing but confirmation of that thesis as the years have rolled on.
no, I agree with you. I think the more mixed race the United States becomes, they're going to become like the Arabs, Arab is another word for Mongol, if I'm not mistaken. Egypt is an interesting example of this as well, of its own self, besides the other nations in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
That mentality is just going to be predominant as well.
And that's something that I like that Jared Taylor really explores in his work, and he explores it in like a kind of an academic way. Well, James LaFond explores it in a lived experience way.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of why I'm here in this arena now. And, so I think that these things, there's a book by Paul, I believe, what's his name? Jason Van Horn and Paul Riley, if I'm not mistaken. It's called Left of Bang. And Left of Bang book is based off of the Marine Corps Combat Hunter program that was being taught at Quantico during the surge. And it was, how do you recognize body language, iconography, a whole host of things, so you can know where are you at, what are the signposts, because bang is like the bad event, the ambush, the roadside bomb, whatever. Left of bang is you're able to see what the indicators are before the event, so you can take action to either stop it or prevent it from happening or get away from it. Right of bang is, okay, bang has happened, now you're reacting to it afterward. So the ability to identify bang, is critical. And I think what I think is very interesting about somebody like you and somebody like James LaFond, you guys may not use those exact terms, but who cares what terms you use? You guys are people that consistently are able to stay left of bang, because you can identify, hey, bang is coming, whatever it is, right? If you're watching the forums back in the day, you see what's the bang that's coming, and you're able to stay ahead of it. 9/10 of people are not able to stay left of bang. Here's what's frustrating to me, though, and this is what frustrates me. If you have the ability to be left of bang and warn everybody else that bang is coming, but they don't want to listen, this messes with my mind.
Well,
because
there's a biblical precedent for that.
Yes, there is. Ezekiel, what is it? Chapter 33, verses 1-3, if I'm not mistaken, where he says, if the watchman warns the people that the enemy is coming and the enemy do not take heed, the blood is not on the watchman's head, the blood is on the people's head. But if the watchman does not warn the people that the enemy is coming and they slay the people, the blood is on the watchman's head.
Well, and I'm in a position of Jonah, sitting under my vine, waiting for Nineveh to be destroyed, because I just want to be right.
Well, hey, I think it was Richard Nixon who said about Pat Buchanan when he was running for president in 1992. He said, look, Pat Buchanan would rather be right than be president.
Yeah.
And, you know, you like that. Dr. Breck, you like that fire and brimstone.
Well, no, I just sitting under my gourd, waiting for Nineveh to be destroyed. Not even about being destroyed, being right.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Well, you know,
that's entirely self-centered.
Maybe things are easier that way, Dr. Breck. I don't know.
See, I don't worry about it's. Well, it's not even that. It's like when you've been told, and that's it. You've been told. It's like I told my wife the other day, or she said, "It's putting bananas in the fridge." I said, "You don't want to have this conversation with me. Why put the bananas in the fridge? You know, obviously there's a good reason I put bananas in the fridge. Don't question me putting bananas in the fridge, you know."
And I said, okay.
And she said, okay. Her New Year's resolution this year is to not argue with me.
Okay.
But the point of the matter is that just like that, when I tell people something, I understand people might want to discuss it, but I don't like being counter-signaled after all this time.
I mean, I'm curious about why you're putting the bananas in the fridge, but I'm not going to ask.
No, I'll tell you.
Okay.
I bought them at the 40. There were 47 cents overripe bananas, so you can't leave them out overnight because they will no longer be ripe at all. With the 47 cents a pound or a bunch of a big, bag of bananas for 47 cents. You need to put them in the fridge just so they'll last long enough to use them overnight.
I have a viewer, and he knows who he is. He's one of my best friends for a long time. I talked to him on the phone today, and when he calls me about every other day. He likes to pick out the most bizarre one-liners from these podcasts. So I know that when he calls me next time after he watches this, he's going to be, "Hey, Richard, you putting your bananas in the refrigerator?"
That's awesome. James LaFawn does that.
Oh, it's a James LaFawn thing. Well, my friend's favorite moment from our James LaFawn podcast was when James LaFawn says he went into a Dollar Tree and was going to fashion a weapon. And I was having problems with somebody the other day, and I was frustrated, and I was telling my friend about it, and he said, "Well, all you got to do is just go into a Dollar Tree, fashion yourself a weapon." And I told him, I said, "Oh, you're not from the wild world of James LaFawn, are you?" He's like, "When I think of weapons, I don't think Dollar Tree." I'm like, "You have not been following James LaFawn's work for a long time, have you?" Okay.
Well, if you ever notice, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, that's all I got.
Yeah, it's funny. James was showing me how to do this thing with the spatula for self-defense. A wooden spatula.
That would make sense. I mean, like, it makes a lot of sense to me. I wonder even if you took rope flow and started doing that with say Krav Maga people and they actually got good at it, if it would be an effective deal.
Oh, yeah.
Give them some baseline.
I think rope flow is going to be taught by everybody within 6 months.
I think so. Well, if you go on Instagram, it's all over Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, the Krav Maga classes are all going to be doing it in 6 months.
It should be, because it works.
I agree. But I think you're right that it would make a big difference.
It would. And so I think we can probably do a Rope Flow 2 podcast in the future. But I think all these things are good. How does it tie back to the central thing? Creative writing. What happens? Because I know that Dr. Breck, I know your wife is probably wondering that. You ever seen that interview where Donald Trump says he calls it the weave, where he talks about a whole bunch of topics and then weaves it back to the original?
Yeah.
Well, I'm doing the weave. Yeah. I've been doing the weave for a long time. Before I even knew Donald Trump was doing it, what it was called. But so the reality is this: our lives that we live out here in the world are our own works of creative fiction in flesh and blood. So all these things tie together. Whether you're writing something down or whether you're living it, they all go together. You got to know the lay of the land. You got to know the rules of the road. And fundamentally, that's what this podcast has been about, whether in the realm of imagination or the political scene in the 20th and 21st century, or ripe bananas or spatula weapons from the Dollar Tree. It all comes back to this fundamental idea. You're writing your own story of your own life. Where's it going to go? Only you can decide. So I don't know, Dr. Breck, that feels like a natural stopping point. What do you think?
I agree. And in closing, I would like to say, just make your own story interesting enough for somebody else to find a one-liner from.
Please do, because let me tell you something. There's a lot of Hallmark movies out there. We don't need any more.
Yes.
There's really not a lot of one-liners from the Hallmark movies. But when you're rolling with somebody like Dr. Breck, I mean, it's just one-liner after one-liner after one-liner. You can never go wrong.
Well, I'm hoping to meet your friend someday. That I really appreciate his appreciation of these shows, and we'll close on that note. And